What is going on, guys? In today's video I will show you the top 10 best builds in New World Aeternum. Also, as I will cover a lot of builds, so not to spend too much time, for each setup I will give you a quick overview of its playstyle. Then as well I will explain the best skill tree setup, then what gear should you wear, then even how many attributes should you allocate for each stat and much more. And then at the end I will show you 725 gear score, and what perks should you get and much more. So then moving over to the first build, which is the bow and a musket. This setup is focused around dealing ranged DPS for both the PvE and PvP. The objective of the build primarily is to annoy and deal free damage to the enemies from long range. Our bow will offer ranged AoE damage and mobility, while the musket will bring strong single target pressure from a distance. You will want to swap between these two weapons, depending on what situation will call for. However, as long as the enemy never gets too close to you, you will be dealing insane amount of damage. So let's take a look at the build. For the gear choice, we will go with the light armor, as this will give us maximum damage and 2 really good dodge rolls. Since this build always wants to be at max range, so we are mainly concerned with damage over survivability. Next we have the attributes, and we want to get 25 strength, 350 dexterity, around 150 to 200 intelligence, and 100 constitution. Some players prefer to go even more extreme and don't spend any points in constitution, but my point of view is that you can deal damage if you are dead, so getting to 50 or even 100 constitution is definitely worth it. Next up we have the setup for the bow. This layout is more focused around dealing damage over time, and as I've mentioned, our objective is to deal as much damage as possible from a range. And then again, this is how it should look like for the musket. The principle is very similar, just musket will focus more on increasing the single target damage over time. If you are interested in the best gear, perks, consumables and everything else, then keep watching until the end of the video. So overall, if you are looking for one of the highest DPS builds in the game, then here it is. Then for the second build we have the fire staff and the rapier. The setup excels at close quarter fighting and uses its extreme mobility to attack and escape. The rapier is built to hit super hard with its specs, giving it enough damage to kill even the most tanky healers or very strong bosses, while the fire staff provides decent ranged offensive options that can do good damage thanks to the high critical rate, while also providing excellent utility with its gap closers. Overall, this setup has the best stamina sustain you could get, making it excellent for a lot of dodging, especially when you're outnumbered in PvP or in a hard expedition. So let's take a look at the build. For our gear choice we have 2 options, so either way the light or medium armor. Both are good choices, it just depends if you're willing to sacrifice survivability for more damage. I personally prefer to go with medium option. Next we have the attributes, and we want to get 25 strength, 300 dexterity, from 300 to 350 intelligence, and 25 focus for that cooldown reduction. As I'm using medium armor, so that is the place where I get my survivability from. However, you can even decide to go full light armor with 0 constitution, or perhaps medium armor with 50 to 100 constitution, and in that case you would sacrifice about 5 to 10% damage. Next up we have our setup for the fire staff. This skill tree is made around AoE damage and increasing as much burning DPS as possible. And then again taking a look at the rapier, and this is how it should look like. So we mainly focus on quick hits, and as we are already squishy, so having 2 strong defensive skills will come in very handy. If you are interested in the best gear, perks, consumables and everything else, then keep watching until the end of the video. Overall, if you want a very strong PvP build, then this is it. Then for the third build we have the greatsword and the great axe. This setup is very powerful melee bruiser that primarily is intended for destroying any target that crosses your path. This build will have incredible hunting capabilities through the use of the mobility spells. However, it also has a large amount of disruption tools that prevents escape and singles out an enemy, so you can restrict his movement and block his incoming attack. For our playstyle, the majority of burst damage will come from the greatsword, while the great axe will come in very handy for catching and locking down any target. So let's take a look at the build. For our gear choice we will go with the medium armor, as we want to mix and match between DPS and survivability. Next we have attributes, and we want to get from around 250 to 300 strength, then 350 dexterity, and 25 constitution. Similar like for any build, you can sacrifice dexterity for more constitution, but I found that these specific numbers work best to have the best balance between maximum melee DPS, but still being able to be tough enough to withstand serious amount of damage. And then finally we have our skill tree. So let's take a look at the greatsword, and this is what we have. This layout focuses more on getting max crit damage and empowering each one of our next attacks. While then on the other hand we take a look at the great axe, and this is how it should look like. So as I've mentioned, this setup focuses around fixing greatsword weaknesses, which are ranged AoE damage and locking down your targets. If you're interested in the best gear, perks, consumables and everything else, then keep watching until the end of the video. Overall, if you're looking for a very fun and strong melee bruiser build, then here it is. Next up we have the best healer build in the game, which is the lifestaff and the void gauntlet. So the lifestaff is the primary healing weapon in the game, and we decided to pair it up with the void gauntlet because of its ability to give us very strong debuffs and healing support. Since this build is designed for group PvE and PvP, so all of the healing abilities are focused around AoE healing, and making sure that we can keep as many of our allies healed as possible. And the best part about this is that not only we will get insane amount of healing done, but also we'll be able to dish out some serious damage. So let's take a look at the build. For the gear choice we will go with the medium armor, as this gives us pretty good healing, while at the same time giving us survivability in case we get in trouble. I personally think that if you as a healer die, then it's GG, game over. So to prevent that, I'm fine with trading small amount of heals for more higher chance of survivability. Then next up we have the attributes, and we want to get 25 strength, 25 dexterity, 150 intelligence, 350 focus and 100 constitution. This particular point allocation is structured around increasing our healing as much as possible, while relatively doing quite a lot of damage, and having bunch of defensives to survive hard fights, no matter if it's for PvE or PvP. And then finally we have our skill tree. So let's take a look at the most important skill tree for the lifestaff, and this is what we have. So our setup is built around AoE healing and increasing its bonuses and reducing mana cost as much as possible. Also, as we are using the best healing spells in the game, so we will have both low and medium cooldown skills, so we can use them for any scenario that we may find ourselves into. And then again, this is how it should look like for the void gauntlet. And this is the weapon that we will mainly use for DPS, so we focus more on dealing and increasing not only ours, but our team's damage as well. As I've previously said, if you're interested in the best gear, perks, consumables and everything else, then keep watching until the end of the video. So overall, if you're looking for hands down the best and most powerful healer build, then this is it. Then for the next build we have the bow and rapier. This setup is a high skill ceiling option that offers some of the highest damage and mobility potential in the game. The key to this build is stacking high bursts of damage and using skills for insane amount of defensives that can also be turned offensively to attack or escape. Our setup will focus around using only the best skills that will allow us to evade the enemy, while constantly dealing ranged damage with our bow skills. The bow is a great weapon, and we will increase its damage even further by increasing its AoE and explosive damage potential. As I've said, this build is not the easiest to play, so if you want a challenge but at the same time be rewarded with a fun and powerful PvP performance, then this setup might be for you. So let's take a look at the build. For our gear choice we will go with the light armor, as this will give us maximum damage and 2 really good dodge rolls. Since this build has already insane amount of defensives, so he will be doing the most lifting on that front. Then next we have the attributes, and we want to get to 25 strength, then from 350 to 400 dexterity, then as well 150 intelligence and 100 constitution. As I've mentioned, some players prefer to go even more extreme and don't spend any points in constitution, but I still prefer that extra HP for hard bosses. Next we have our setup for the bow, and this layout is more focused around damage over time. Also, as I've mentioned, our objective is to deal as much damage as possible from the range, so we will upgrade that aspect as much as we can. And then again, this is how it should look like for the rapier. So then on the other hand, the rapier in this case is our primary defensive tool that we use for mobility, and at any time we can run away, or perhaps run into another fleeing enemy. This build is very fun and strong, and as most skill usage will be the difference between winning or losing a fight, so if you really want an in-depth playstyle, then I definitely recommend for you to try it out. So then moving over to the first build, which is the sword and the warhammer. This setup focuses on crowd control and using your tankiness to do massive amounts of AoE damage while surviving huge amount of enemy hits. If you use the best skill tree build, then both of these weapons will synergize perfectly to allow for a flurry of abilities that will leave the enemy target staggered, stunned and knocked down over and over again. So as our job will be to prevent the enemy from moving, so then us or our team will be able to finish them off. Of course, we won't be dealing the craziest amount of DPS, but the staggers and massive amount of survivability will be definitely worth the trade-off. So let's take a look at the build. For our gear choice, we will go with the heavy armor, as this will give us the maximum amount of defense and will enable us to use the best shield in the game. Also, since our build's primary objective is to stun and tank, so going full heavy is a no-brainer. Next we have the attributes, and we want to get from 300 to 350 strength. Then 25 focus and 300 constitution. No matter at which level or gear score you currently are, pretty much just split your attributes to half. So put 50 points into strength and 50 in constitution. Next up we have our setup for the sword and shield. This skill tree is more focused on holding the enemy's aggro, increasing our defense and speed, and of course most importantly giving us some of the best defensive tools as well. And then again, this is how it should look like for the warhammer. So then on the other hand, this setup focuses on increasing our AoE damage and locking down your targets. The warhammer has the best AoE potential in the game, and as a tank this is very useful for both PvE and PvP. So if you are interested in the best gear, perks, consumables and everything else, then keep watching until the end of the video. Overall, if you are looking for one of the best and most fun tank builds, then here it is. Next up we have the musket and void gauntlet. This setup's main focus is on melting down enemies with a lot of HP, as you will be doing crazy amount of damage, especially against bosses and heavy armor users. A lot of players really like this build because they can stay at range while doing incredible amount of burst damage, and if an enemy or a mob ever wants to reach you, then you will just melt them in few seconds. So let's take a look at the build. For our gear choice, we will go with the light armor, as this will give us the maximum amount of damage, while also giving us 2 dodge rolls that we can use to catch or escape an enemy. As our main playstyle revolves around damage from range, so I definitely recommend to go with 1 medium armor and then the rest light equipment. Next we have the attributes, and we should get 350 dexterity, then 200 intelligence and 100 constitution. Since this build always wants to be at max range, so we are mainly concerned with damage over survivability. However, you can even go more extreme and sacrifice all of your constitution for even more DPS. I definitely don't recommend it, but it's an option as well. Then next up we have the skill tree, and this is how it should look like for the musket. These nodes and the overall layout is structured around increasing our damage over time, while also increasing our headshot and overall DPS by more than 2 times. And then again, this is how it should look like for the void gauntlet. This setup is made around removing and buffing the musket's weaknesses, which are locking down your target and armor penetration. So this is where the void gauntlet comes in very handy. If you are interested in the best gear, perks, consumables and everything else, then keep watching until the end of the video. Overall, if you are looking for amazingly fun and high DPS range build, then here you go. Next, let's take a look at another tank build, which is the sword with a spear. This setup has become very popular in the recent updates, as its playstyle is focused on being able to quickly initiate a fight on a single enemy, then put them into a crowd control combination, which then afterwards opens them up for a huge amount of damage opportunity. This build has an amazing survivability, and he can pretty much outrun just about any enemy. So let's take a look at the setup. For our weight we have 2 options, so go full heavy or maybe decide to go with medium armor, as this build has quite a lot of CC and mobility, so you're not required to go full tank. However, I personally recommend to go with the medium armor, as this build has 2 ways of playing it, so be a tank with a high CC or be a melee bruiser that is super annoying and can do huge amount of DPS. The latter option has higher risk but also higher DPS, and just overall in my opinion is more fun. Next we have the attributes, and we should get 350 strength, 250 dexterity, and 50 intelligence. But if you decide not to go all in on DPS, then you can sacrifice 100 dexterity for 100 constitution. Then next up we have the skill tree, and this is how it should look like for the sword and shield. This layout is focused around high bursts of DPS and survivability, while this is how it should look like for the spear. And this weapon's main focus is on crowd control and locking down the enemy as much as possible. So if you're looking for a super fun and CC oriented build, then here it is. Then for the next build we have the hatchet with the warhammer. This setup focuses on high survivability and high AoV damage as well, as we're using the hatchet with the berserker skill, so we can damage the enemies from a range while also surviving even the toughest bosses if we ever drop below 0 HP. If perhaps you want to be a half tank and half DPS, then this is the perfect setup for you. So for our weight we can again decide to go with the heavy or medium armor. For this setup I personally prefer to go with the full heavy, but as I've said, it is up to you. Next we have the attributes, and as we're going full tank, so we want to get about 300 strength, then 25 in dexterity, intelligence and focus, and then lastly the last 300 in constitution. And again, if you're not at the max level yet, then just simplify this by putting half points into strength and then the other half in constitution. Next let's take a look at the skill tree, and this is how it should look like for the warhammer. So pretty similar like the previous bruiser build, as we're focusing on AoV DPS over armor penetration. And then again, this is how it should look like for the hatchet. So we mainly get the berserk skill and upgrade it, while also not forgetting about getting these two debuffs. If you are interested in the best gear, perks, consumables and everything else, then keep watching until the end of the video. And overall, if you want to use a very powerful tank build that pretty much never dies, then this is it. And then for the last and final one, we have the bow with the void gauntlet. This setup is great for dealing damage over time in big clumps, as most of our skills are built around AoV debuffs, stuns and interrupts. Also, as we are going to be using void gauntlet with the CC skills, so we will need to be relatively close to the enemy, which means not making ourselves very squishy. So then we can go in, lock down the target, then burst him down, and then come back and survive another day. So if this sounds fun, then let's take a look at the setup, and for the weight we want to use the light armor, as this will give us incredible amount of damage while also giving us 2 dodge rolls, so we can quickly get in and out of fights. Then for the attributes we want to get 25 strength, then from 350 to 400 dexterity, then also 150 intelligence, and finally 100 constitution. As we are using the light armor, so to get some defenses, we for sure want to spend 100 constitution, just in case to be safe. Next, as far as the skill tree goes, this is how it should look like for the bow. So this is built around AoV damage and just burst DPS, so we can quickly melt down large groups of enemies. And then on the other hand, this is how it should look like for the void gauntlet. And this is built around increasing your damage and locking down any target that crosses your path. Just of course remember that you have almost 0 defenses, so using 2 dodge rolls and positioning your character will be quite crucial for your success. And then for the last and final part, let's take a look at the best gear, buffs and consumables that pretty much all builds could use. And remember that this is just an example. So as far as armor goes, of course slowly but surely, you want to get to 275 gear score. And no matter if you choose medium or light armor, always use the abyssal / war gem on your gear. And you can try to get some of these perks like the keen, / condition and refreshing. Then as far as your weapon goes, use opal or augmentation gems to convert damage to your highest attribute, but only do this if your second weapon doesn't support your main one. So for example, when you pair musket with the ice gauntlet, the musket doesn't utilize the intelligence, so then you want to use the intelligence converter gem to do more damage based on intelligence. Then next up, let's go over to the consumables, and you want to use the healing potions, regen potions and also mana potions, if for example you're a healer and constantly running out of it. And then lastly, for everyone, you should use any type of food that boosts your attributes even higher. Remember that this is only for 30 minutes, so you need to constantly eat more to keep up the bonuses. And then lastly, don't also forget about using honing stones to get easy from 5 to 10% damage increase. And again, you need to keep reapplying it once in a while, as it also has a timer. And that's about it. So if you enjoyed this video, click like, subscribe and comment. If you are interested in more content, then check out my channel and I will see you in the next one. So take it easy. Peace.